the 22nd of September 1943. Imagine the sound of a bone snapping, a fractured instep. Medically speaking, it means zero weight-bearing capacity. It means every single movement sends a shockwave of agony straight to the brain. Under normal circumstances, this is a ticket home. But for Second Lieutenant Ernest Childers, this wasn't a ticket home. It was the starting line. The air above him is being shredded. That is the sound of the German MG42, Hitler's Zipper, spitting out 1,200 rounds per minute. It's a wall of lead that has pinned down the entire 45th Infantry Division. Childers is face down in the dirt. He is the only officer left. He cannot walk. He cannot run. So, he makes a choice that defies physics and sanity. He starts to crawl, dragging a broken body up a steep hill, directly into the mouth of the enemy. He has his carbine. He has his pain. But to take out the most advanced machine gun of World War II, he didn't use a grenade. He used a rock. This wasn't just a random skirmish. This was Operation Avalanche, the invasion of mainland Italy. The 45th Infantry Division, known as the Thunderbirds, had a critical objective: cut the German supply lines at Oliveto, but the map lied. It didn't show the death trap waiting for them. Company C was completely pinned down behind shattered stone walls. The German defense was flawless. They held the high ground. They had the heavy artillery, and they had the visibility. The situation was a stalemate of the worst kind. If the Americans stood up, the snipers would take their heads off. If they stayed down, the German mortars were dialing in to turn their position into a graveyard. Zero movement, zero options. Certain death. So, how do you break a modern military siege when you are outnumbered, outgunned, and physically broken? You don't act like a soldier. You act like a hunter. This is the untold story of how one Muskogee Creek warrior defeated the German war machine, not with a tank, but with an empty gun and a rock. To understand why what happened next shouldn't have been physically possible, you have to look at the math of the kill zone. The German army wasn't just holding the high ground. They were holding it with the MG42, known as Hitler's Zipper because of the terrifying ripping sound it made. This weapon fired 1,200 rounds per minute. In terms of raw firepower, military historians estimate that a single MG42 position was equal to about 15 American riflemen. And Childers wasn't facing one. He was facing a network of them. The entire Salerno campaign was already a bloodbath, costing the Allies nearly 12,000 casualties. But for Company C, the statistics stopped being just numbers and became immediate reality. A German mortar shell slammed directly into their aid station. In a blink, the doctor was dead. There was no medical evacuation. There was no retreat. They were trapped in a geographical nightmare, a landscape of terraced cornfields and stone walls that offered perfect cover for the defenders above and zero protection for the attackers below. The unit was paralyzed. The morale was breaking. And then there was Childers. He looked down at his foot. He had fractured his instep after stumbling into a shell crater in the early morning mist. Every heartbeat pumped fresh pain through his leg. Medical protocol says he shouldn't even be standing, let alone fighting. But looking at his pinned-down men, hearing the screams of the wounded with no doctor to help them, something switched off in his brain. The pain didn't matter anymore. He signaled to 8 men. He didn't order them to charge. That would be suicide. He ordered them to follow his lead. He dropped to his hands and knees. To the German commander looking down his binoculars, this scene made no sense. A crippled American officer, dragging himself through the dirt, leading a handful of men directly into the crosshairs of the deadliest machine guns in Europe. It looked like an act of desperation. It looked like a suicide mission. But the Germans made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were fighting a standard American GI, trained in standard infantry tactics. They didn't realize that Ernest Childers wasn't relying on his military training to survive this hill. He was tapping into something much older. He wasn't marching into battle. He was stalking prey. To understand how a man with a broken bone could outmaneuver a German platoon, you have to understand that the skills saving Company C weren't learned in a military boot camp. They were learned in the dust. Rewind to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, during the Great Depression, a sepia-toned world of poverty that most of us can't even imagine today. Ernest Childers grew up in a home where hunger was a constant noise in the background. His father, a tribal lawyer, died when Ernest was just 12, leaving a family of 5 with nothing. In this environment, a gun wasn't a weapon of war. It was a tool for survival. The history books tell us that the Muskogee Creek people are legendary marksmen. But for young Childers, it came down to simple math. His family could only afford one .22 caliber bullet a day. Just one. Imagine that pressure on a 12-year-old boy. He would go out into the fields to hunt rabbits. If he missed, his family didn't eat dinner. There was no reload. There was no suppressing fire. There was only patience, breath control, and absolute precision. He learned to become invisible, to move through dry grass without snapping a twig, to wait for the perfect heartbeat to pull the trigger. Later, at the Chilocco Indian Agricultural School, the U.S. government tried to mold him into a soldier through the ROTC program. They gave him a uniform and taught him discipline. But deep down, the discipline was already there. It was forged in hunger. Flash forward to 1943, on that Italian hillside. The cornfields of Oliveto probably looked a lot like the fields of Oklahoma. Childers stopped being an officer. He switched off the pain in his ankle the same way he used to switch off the hunger in his belly. He wasn't fighting a war anymore. He was hunting. He slithered through the cornstalks. His movement was uncanny. To the Germans, he was a ghost. He didn't crawl like a soldier trained to keep his head down. He moved like a predator closing the gap, and he had to get close. Because he had spotted his first target. Ahead of him, nested inside a stone house, were 2 German snipers. They had high-powered rifles with optics designed to kill from hundreds of yards away. Childers was armed with an M1 carbine. It's a lightweight weapon, effective only at close range. In a long-range duel, he loses 100% of the time. The math is impossible. But Childers knew something the Germans didn't. The one-bullet rule. He wasn't going to engage them in a firefight. He was going to wait until he could see the whites of their eyes. But to do that, he had to cross 30 yards of open ground. On a broken foot. The crawl was agonizing. Imagine dragging a dead weight behind you, except that dead weight is your own body part, screaming with every inch of friction against the Italian soil. Childers was in the dirt, smelling the crushed cornstalks and the cordite. His heart was hammering against his ribs, loud enough, he feared, to give away his position. He wasn't a soldier marching anymore. He was a shadow. He reached the stone house. The German snipers were right above him. They were scanning the horizon for American helmets, but they never looked down. Childers stood up. The pain in his fractured ankle must have been blinding, but his hands were steady. He raised his M1 carbine. Now, a quick technical note on the M1. It is significantly lighter than the standard M1 Garand, weighing only about 5.2 pounds. It fires a smaller, 30 caliber cartridge. Critics called it underpowered, but in close quarters, it was fast, light, and deadly accurate. 2 shots rang out. 2 empty brass casings spun through the air in slow motion. 2 German snipers slumped over their windowsill. Childers didn't celebrate. He didn't even pause. The one-bullet rule of his childhood had just been applied to the Wehrmacht. He signaled to his 8 men down the hill, suppressing fire. As his men opened up, creating a wall of noise to distract the enemy, Childers circled around the back of the first machine gun nest. He pulled the pin on a grenade. He didn't just throw it. He placed it with the precision of a man who couldn't afford to miss. The explosion silenced the first gun. Adrenaline was masking the pain, but it couldn't mask the reality of his supplies. He reached for his ammo pouch. Empty. He checked his belt for another grenade. Gone. He looked up the hill. The second German machine gun nest, the one that had been slaughtering his company all morning, was still active. It was turning its turret toward him. He pulled the trigger of his carbine. Click. That dry, hollow mechanical sound is the most terrifying noise a soldier can hear. He was alone. He was crippled. He was unarmed. And he was about 30 feet away from a fully loaded German squad. This is the moment where the history books usually talk about bravery. But Ernest Childers didn't survive because of bravery. He survived because of creativity. He looked down at the dirt. His gun was useless. His belt was empty. But the ground was full of rocks. In the heat of battle, the human brain falls back on conditioning. For the German soldiers in that nest, if a dark object flies over the wall and lands at your feet, your brain screams one word: grenade. Childers picked up a rock. It was heavy, cold, and ancient. He wound up his arm. Slow motion description. We see the rock leave his hand. It sails through the air, rotating slightly, a harmless piece of Italian limestone, pretending to be a weapon of mass destruction. It landed inside the machine gun nest with a distinct, metallic clunk. The reaction was instant. Psychological warfare at its finest. The German soldiers didn't wait to see if the pin was pulled. They didn't wait to see if it was metal or stone. They panicked. Grenade! Grenade! 2 German soldiers scrambled out of their fortified hole, diving into the open to escape the explosion that was never coming. Childers didn't hesitate. Using the absolute last round in his carbine, or perhaps grabbing a rifle from a fallen comrade, the reports vary, he dropped the first man. His men down the hill picked off the second. The nest was clear. The grenade never exploded. But Childers wasn't done. He limped to the top of the hill. There, he found the German mortar observer, the man responsible for raining artillery on his friends all morning. The German reached for his pistol. Childers raised his carbine. Here is the final irony. Childers' gun was empty. It was a bluff. But the German didn't know that. He looked at the Native American warrior who had just single-handedly dismantled his entire platoon, and his will to fight evaporated. He threw up his hands. Fear, it turns out, is a much more effective weapon than gunpowder. Let's just pause for a second to process that. That wasn't a tactic he learned in a manual. That was pure, raw survival instinct. Most brave men would have charged and died. Most prudent men would have retreated. Childers did the one thing nobody expected. He outsmarted them with a stone. I have to ask you, if you were staring down the barrel of a German machine gun, wounded, out of ammo, with nothing but a rock in your hand, if you respect that level of battlefield IQ, that refusal to accept defeat, go ahead and drop the word warrior in the comments right now. Let's see how many of us truly appreciate that kind of quick thinking under pressure. But Childers couldn't celebrate his victory yet. Because the sun was going down, the adrenaline was fading. And the German counterattack was coming. The sun set over Olevato, but the war didn't stop. If you've ever broken a bone, you know that the moment the adrenaline leaves your system is when the real torture begins. As night fell, the temperature in the Italian mountains dropped. The cold seeped into Childers' fractured foot. Every nerve ending was screaming, but he couldn't rest. Taking the hill was only half the battle. Holding it was the other half. Throughout the night, the Germans probed their lines. Mortar shells continued to rain down, shaking the ground they had just fought so hard to take. This is where the definition of a leader shifts from action hero to something much deeper. Military doctrine teaches that in defensive operations, the morale of the unit is the single most critical factor. A terrified soldier freezes. A motivated soldier fights. Childers spent that night limping from foxhole to foxhole. He distributed what little ammunition they had left. He checked on his men, 8 terrified enlisted soldiers, who were looking at their lieutenant not just for orders, but for hope. He didn't show them his pain. He showed them resolve. For hours, they held the line against the darkness and the German counterattacks. Then, finally, dawn broke. The morning light hit the olive groves. The sound of friendly tanks and marching boots came from the valley below. The rest of the 180th Infantry Regiment had broken through. The road to Oliveto was open. Only then, when the first relief soldier reached their position, did Ernest Childers allow himself to stop. The adrenaline reserve was empty. He collapsed. He had done the impossible. The 8th of April, 1944. Naples, Italy. 7 months after crawling up that hill, Ernest Childers stood in formation. General Alexander Patch, the commander of the 7th Army, stepped forward. He pinned the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can bestow, onto Childers' chest. At that moment, Childers became a symbol. He was the first Native American to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. The military and the media seized upon his image. He became the face of the patriot nations, proof that the indigenous people of America were fighting for the same flag as everyone else. In interviews, when asked why he fought so hard for a country that had historically marginalized his people, his answer was simple, profound, and deeply rooted in his Creek heritage. He said, "I fought not because I hated them, but because I loved this land." But here is where the movie usually ends, and where reality begins. Ernest Childers returned home to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He brought back the medal. He brought back the glory. But the medal didn't change the reality of 1,940 America. Imagine this scene. The shiny gold Medal of Honor sitting on a table inside a humble, weathered wooden shack. This is the paradox that defines his legacy. He was a national hero, celebrated in parades, yet he returned to a society still plagued by poverty and systemic discrimination. He had just single-handedly dismantled a German machine gun nest to secure freedom for the world, yet he belonged to a demographic that often struggled to find that same freedom at home. He fought for the very government that had once stripped his ancestors of their land. And he did it with honor. That isn't just bravery. That is a level of grace and resilience that a medal can't even begin to measure. Ernest Childers was not an anomaly. He was the tip of the spear. In World War II, more than 44,000 Native Americans left their reservations to serve. And here is the statistic that should blow your mind. The vast majority of them were not drafted. They volunteered. Think about that. They volunteered to fight for a government that had broken treaties with their ancestors. Why? Because before it was America, it was their land, and you protect your land. Childers taught us a lesson on that Italian hillside that is still relevant today. When he ran out of bullets, he didn't run out of options. He picked up a rock. That rock proves that the most dangerous weapon of war is not a machine gun. It is the human mind. It is the will to improvise, adapt, and overcome when the odds say you should be dead. Today, if you go to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, you will find the Ernest Childers Middle School. Every day, hundreds of children walk through doors bearing his name. They learn, they grow, and they dream in freedom. And that is the ultimate legacy. A soldier's job is to destroy, but a hero's job is to build. Ernest Childers didn't just clear a path for the 45th Infantry Division. He cleared a path for the future. History has a terrible habit of forgetting the quiet heroes. Men like Ernest Childers didn't fight for fame. They fought for us, but it is our duty to ensure their sacrifice is never erased. If you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, hit that share button, not for the algorithm, but to honor a man who crawled through hell for his country. His name belongs in more than just a history book. It belongs in our collective memory. And if you want to join us as we excavate more lost chapters of World War II, if you want to help us uncover the truth beneath the dust, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Let's keep digging together. As the old saying goes, a warrior does not fight because he hates what is in front of him. He fights because he loves what is behind him. Ernest Childers loved this land, and because of him, it remains free.